A 19-year-old young woman, Nana Dirksmeyer, was found dead in her own apartment. Investigators began investigating and quickly discovered several disturbing facts, but they were unable to solve the case for several years. Until the truth came out, everyone was shocked and outraged by the turn of events, as no one expected such an outcome. Nana Dirksmeyer was born on December 26, 1985, in Russellville, Arkansas. She grew up in a very large family with 4 brothers and 1 sister. When Nana was 10 years old, her father passed away, which was a tragedy for the entire family. But they were soon to face an even more terrible shock. Sometime later, the young woman confessed to her mother that her father had repeatedly subjected her to violence. She was afraid to speak up while he was alive, and her confession was a real shock to her mother, who had no idea what her husband was capable of. Despite such a tragic experience, Nana found the strength to move on and later decided to help other young women who had become victims of similar crimes. For this, she joined a volunteer organization where she provided support to children in need. During her school years, Nana began dating a guy named Kevin Jones. The young woman also took part in beauty contests and achieved significant success in this field. She won several local contests, which allowed her to compete for the title of Miss Arkansas. In addition, Nana actively participated in the life of the local church and sang in the choir. After high school, when Nana was 19, she and her boyfriend enrolled in Arkansas Tech University located in their hometown. The young woman decided to rent her own apartment as she wanted to start an independent life. After completing her first year, her boyfriend decided to change his major and transferred to another university, which was an hour-and-a-half drive from their city. By that time, the couple had been dating for about 5 years, and it was their first time living in different cities. On December 14, 2005, Kevin returned home for Christmas holidays. He stopped by Nana's apartment before heading to his parents' home, which was about 16 kilometers away from the city. The next day, both of them had plans. Nana had to take her last 2 exams and also meet with a young woman from the volunteer organization. Kevin was going to take his mom, who worked as a librarian, to a school event. On the morning of December 15th, at around 9 a.m., Nana sent a message to Kevin wishing him a good day. He was waiting for Nana to call him after her exams and let him know how they went, but she wasn't answering his calls or messages, and he began to worry. Around 6 p.m., Kevin took his mother to the school event, but he couldn't shake the thought of why Nana wasn't answering her phone all day. Eventually, Kevin decided to call his friend, who worked as a pizza delivery guy in the area where Nana's apartment complex was located. Kevin asked him to stop by and check if everything was okay. His friend quickly arrived and saw that Nana's car was parked in the parking lot and the lights were on in her apartment, but nobody was answering the door. He told Kevin about this, and then Kevin told his mother that he was worried about his girlfriend and wanted to go to her apartment to check if everything was okay. The woman agreed, and they went to the apartment complex together. Kevin's friend was waiting for them there, and all 3 of them started knocking on the door, but there was still no answer. Kevin had a key, but he left it at home that day because he didn't plan on stopping by Nana's. A few minutes later, Kevin and his friend tried to open the front door because they thought something bad might have happened to Nana, but they couldn't get in. Then Kevin remembered that there were sliding glass doors in the back of the apartment. Approaching them, he immediately noticed something strange. Nana took her safety seriously, so every time she was home alone, she put a special removable grill on the back glass door, mainly used against burglars. But this time, there was no grill, and the doors themselves were unlocked. Once inside the apartment, they immediately noticed blood on the blinds, and a shocking sight awaited them in the bedroom. Nana was lying face down in a pool of blood, wearing nothing but socks. Kevin rushed to her and tried to lift her but immediately realized she was dead. Meanwhile, his mother called the police. Investigators arrived at the apartment and began examining the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim had been struck multiple times on the head with a table lamp that was found on the floor. They also discovered a bloody fingerprint on the lamp, which they believed may have been left by the killer. Next to the victim's body, they found her phone with the battery removed on the bedside table. Investigators found an empty condom wrapper. After examining all the doors and windows, they found no signs of forced entry. Medical examiners studied the victim's body and confirmed that the table lamp had been used as a weapon, with the metal base of the lamp matching the victim's head injuries. In addition, the victim had multiple knife wounds. According to the pathologist, the victim had died between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m., and there were no signs of sexual violence, which puzzled the detectives, considering that the victim was found without clothing. They first suspected a sexual motive for the crime. However, experts suggested that the perpetrator may have used a condom, the wrapper of which was found in the apartment, making it practically impossible to determine the presence of sexual violence. In the end, the police had no evidence, but one interesting detail emerged. The crime scene was not thoroughly examined, with investigators failing to collect blood samples from the blinds on the back door or search for shoe prints in the apartment, which could have been used as evidence. Moreover, they didn't even go to the second floor of the apartment. These oversights were explained by the fact that the investigators found their suspect, the victim's boyfriend, almost immediately after arriving at the scene. The first thing that made them suspect Kevin's involvement in the murder was the fact that he had a large amount of the victim's blood on him when he entered the apartment and ran to her. He tried to lift her up, and upon realizing that she was dead, he hugged and held her. The police found this behavior strange and suspected that Kevin had done it deliberately. By hugging the victim and getting covered in her blood, he may have destroyed potential evidence and compromised the crime scene. It would be difficult for investigators to prove his guilt. For example, if Kevin's clothes or nails were found with the victim's blood, it could easily be explained that he hugged the victim after discovering her body. Another suspicious moment was that Kevin went to check on his girlfriend not alone but with his mother, and he also invited his friend to the apartment. Investigators believed that this way he secured two witnesses who found the body with him and saw him covered in blood. The police talked to Kevin for a long time right outside Nane's apartment, and from their questions, the young man realized that they considered him a suspect. Then he said something that made the investigators even more convinced that he was the killer. Understanding that he was suspected, Kevin began arguing with the investigators and mentioned that he constantly watches law and order and knows that they are trying to make him guilty. These words also seemed strange to the police. In addition, they found out that the key to Nane's apartment was only with 3 people: the girlfriend herself, her mother, and Kevin. Considering that no signs of breaking in were found, they assumed that the guy used his copy of the key to enter the apartment. Kevin was taken to the police station for interrogation for several hours. He told his version of events that day and insisted that he had nothing to do with the murder. In turn, investigators directly accused him of this and urged him to confess. During the interrogation, another fact emerged that the police considered strange. Around 4 p.m., after numerous attempts to call his girlfriend, Kevin sent a message asking if she was alive. Given that Nana was already dead at that time, the investigators found this suspicious. While the guy did not demand a lawyer and tried to answer all questions, the investigators talked to him for several hours, constantly increasing pressure. Towards the end, they not only accused him of the murder directly but also manipulated the facts. Detectives said several times that there was incontrovertible evidence against him and the only way to lighten his fate was to confess to everything. After the police left the interrogation room and left him alone, Kevin stood up and started punching the back of the chair. For the investigators, this became another sign that the young man had a tendency to violence and could commit murder. However, in reality, the police had no evidence that could link Kevin to the murder. Medical experts found that Nana had tried to fend off her attacker, meaning that there should have been bruises and scratches on the killer's body, but none were found on Kevin. Despite this, the detectives continued to believe he was guilty and tried to find evidence. They interviewed over 50 people, hoping to find any witnesses, but it yielded no results. However, after talking with Nane's friends, the police learned something important. It turned out that shortly before her death, she had started seeing another guy secretly from Kevin. Investigators immediately checked this person, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. This fact added even more suspicion to Kevin because now he had a motive. The young man could have come to Nane's house without warning, seen an empty contraceptive package, and realized that she was cheating on him. In a fit of rage, he could have killed her and then fled the scene and planned a way to avoid responsibility. This version was consistent with the nature of the injuries inflicted on the victim. She was killed with particular cruelty, which, in most similar cases, indicates strong personal animosity of the killer towards the victim. A few days later, Kevin agreed to undergo a polygraph test. The operator concluded that the young man gave numerous false answers, and one of the investigators even claimed that this was the worst result on a polygraph in his 28-year career. However, there is one caveat here. The person who read the device's readings was not a certified specialist. He was just a police officer who had not undergone the necessary training to work with this device. But this did not bother the detectives. After the interrogation, they again put pressure on Kevin, trying to force a confession. They claimed that all his acquaintances and relatives already knew that he killed Nane. The police really told everyone that Kevin's guilt was practically proven and that he would soon be arrested. They convinced the victim's parents that he was the one who killed their daughter, although they refused to believe it until the end. The day before the funeral, a farewell ceremony was supposed to take place in the church, and Kevin had been helping to organize it. Since early in the morning, he was called in for questioning again, with the promise of being released before the start of the ceremony. In the end, Kevin spent 7 hours at the police station and missed the ceremony. Nobody present knew he was being questioned, so many assumed that Kevin didn't show up due to guilt over what had happened. Nane's parents didn't even want him to come to the funeral, as investigators had already convinced them of his involvement in the murder. But Kevin still came and sat far away from her relatives. By that time, experts had finished examining the evidence that the police had taken from the victim's apartment. Upon inspecting the light bulb in the desk lamp, they found a fingerprint that belonged to Kevin. It had been left by Nane's blood, which indicated that the fingerprint could only have been made during or after the murder. This became the only available evidence for the investigators, but they continued to dig under Kevin for several more months, hoping to find more evidence. They were unable to do so, and on March 31, 2006, they decided to try to obtain a conviction with the available evidence. The young man was arrested and charged with murder. At that time, many residents still believed that he was guilty, so Kevin's lawyers first requested a change of venue to another district. They were concerned that the jurors might be negatively predisposed against their client and render a guilty verdict without sufficient evidence. This request was granted, and the trial began in another city. The defense called a witness who provided Kevin with a solid alibi. A plumber had come to his parents' house that morning and saw him there around 10:30 a.m. The prosecution insisted that Kevin could have had time to go to Nane's and commit the murder, as according to medical experts. She had died between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. They also presented an interesting fact. Kevin's phone had been turned off between 10:30 a.m. and 12 p.m. This time frame coincided with the time of the victim's murder. Furthermore, data from Kevin's phone showed that he only started calling his girlfriend at 4:30 p.m., although during questioning, he claimed that he had been trying to contact her all day. However, at that time, the young man may have meant not only calls but also messages. Lawyers presented two more witnesses whose testimony disproved the possibility of Kevin committing the murder. One of them was Kevin's grandmother, who said that on that day, she saw her grandson near the gas station and gave him some money to have a snack at a cafe. Another witness saw the guy between 12:30 and 1 p.m. near the restaurant, and the establishment's cameras recorded him having lunch. Thus, the young man simply could not have committed the murder and returned back in time. Lawyers also challenged the fact that Kevin could have left a bloody fingerprint on the lamp during the murder. In that case, by the time the body was discovered, the blood should have dried up, and the experts who came to the apartment that evening wrote in the report that the bloody fingerprint was slightly damp, confirming that Kevin could have left it accidentally when he found Nane's body with his mother and friend. But that's not all. It turned out that based on the table lamp, which was used to hit the victim, fingerprints were also found, but they did not belong to Kevin, and checking them against the databases did not yield any results. Lawyers insisted that these fingerprints belonged to the real killer. Lawyers also pointed out that the police did a very poor job from the first minutes. They did not inspect the entire apartment, which could have missed many potential clues. At the trial, a medical expert who examined the victim's body spoke, and an interesting statement awaited all participants in the process. He determined that after death, the victim's body lay on her back for some time, after which she was turned face down. This could indicate that the young woman was still subjected to violence. The expert confirmed that he did not find any direct signs of this, but added that he could not rule out such a scenario. Finally, lawyers presented the main trump card. According to the official statement of the prosecution, no fingerprints or DNA were found on the empty contraceptive package found next to the victim's body. But lawyers ordered a retest, and this time, the experts found male DNA. The analysis showed that it did not belong to Kevin, and checking it against the databases did not yield any results. The trial lasted over a year, but in July 2007, the jury delivered its verdict. They found Kevin not guilty of the murder of Nana due to lack of evidence. For the victim's relatives, who had believed him to be the killer from the first weeks, this decision was a shock. They continued to believe that Kevin was responsible for her death, and now he had managed to avoid punishment. Despite their client being acquitted, the legal team promised to continue working on the case and find the real killer. Considering that the police were fixated on Kevin, no one expected them to finally do their job properly. The first thing the lawyers did was to get the DNA from the contraceptive packaging compared to all the men who knew Nane. All these people voluntarily provided their samples, and none of them matched. This went on for 2 months until something unexpected happened in September 2007. The police arrested a man named Gary Dunn for robbery, and that's when things got interesting. Firstly, this man had already been convicted for attacking another woman. Secondly, he lived in the same residential complex as Nane. Thirdly, in the early stages of the investigation, the police considered him a suspect but quickly switched their focus to Kevin as they believed he was the killer. Given all this, the boys' lawyers requested a DNA test, and there was a long-awaited breakthrough. The sample from the contraceptive packaging matched Gary's DNA. It turned out that after the young woman's murder, investigators even questioned him using a polygraph. Gary, who was 26 at the time, passed it completely, even though in that case, the interrogation was also conducted by a non-certified specialist. Moreover, none of them even checked this person's alibi. Then Gary said that during the murder, he was shopping with his mother. After his DNA matched the sample from the victim's apartment, investigators finally bothered to check this information. The alibi turned out to be false. Gary really went shopping with his mother, just not at the time of the murder, as confirmed by the receipts with the purchase dates, and Gary even showed them to the police. But they simply disregarded such important information. They saw that the dates on the checks did not match the day of the murder. This was stated in the reports, but for some unknown reason, they either did not attach importance to this or somehow did not notice that the days did not match. In the end, experts compared Gary's fingerprints with those found on Nane's table lamp, and they matched. However, a serious problem arose here. The fingerprints and DNA matched, but not 100%. The judicial system has certain norms according to which the necessary coincidence indicators are established for guilt recognition. In Gary's case, these indicators were insufficient, although there were practically no chances that the DNA and fingerprints belonged to someone else. The investigators were likely guilty. Firstly, they did not study all the available evidence immediately after the murder as the rules require. It is possible that the DNA samples deteriorated slightly while not being properly studied a year after the murder. Secondly, the police could have missed many other clues because they simply did not search the entire apartment. As soon as the detectives received all this information, they arrested Gary and charged him with Nane's murder. Interestingly, at the time of her death, the man was on parole. In 2002, he attacked a woman who was running in the park, knocked her down, and started beating her, telling her that he was going to kill her. The woman managed to escape and ran to her car, while Gary fled the scene but was quickly found. The man spent 19 months in prison, after which he was released early. Interestingly, his DNA sample was not entered into the database. The trial of Gary began in April 2010, and there were many interesting things waiting for everyone. His own wife testified against him, saying that he was an aggressive and dangerous man. Gary regularly raised his hand against her, and the woman seriously feared for her life, so she was afraid to leave him. But the most interesting thing was that a few weeks before the victim's death, she saw her husband spying on Nana through the window of her apartment. Based on this, the prosecution assumed that the man had premeditated the attack. Given his criminal history, Gary clearly had a tendency towards violence, and he may have been keeping a close eye on Nana since she lived just a few meters away from him. On December 15th, he decided to act. Apparently, he knocked on her apartment door and came inside under a false pretense, where he grabbed the table lamp and struck her several times before assaulting and killing her. Because Gary used contraception, medical experts could not definitively say whether the victim had been sexually assaulted, but all the evidence pointed to it. Gary's lawyers denied his involvement, but he had no real alibi, so they focused on trying to blame Kevin. According to the lawyers, Kevin found out that the young woman was cheating on him and killed her. Kevin even had to testify in court and listen as they tried to paint him as the true criminal. Unfortunately, the prosecution could not use Gary's fingerprints or DNA as evidence, even though the match was practically undeniable. As a result, the jury could not come to a unanimous decision, and the trial was declared a mistrial. A new trial was not far behind, and its key difference was that a woman who Gary had nearly killed in 2002 testified in court. She told her how the man had attacked her and how she barely managed to escape. But despite this, the second trial also ended in nothing as the jurors did not reach a consensus. Consequently, Gary Dunn walked free as a free man, although his guilt was practically obvious. But a few years later, he did earn himself a prison sentence in 2018 when Gary was 39. He committed 2 separate crimes in one day. First, he attempted to kidnap a woman from a church parking lot, but she managed to fight him off. A few hours later, Gary stripped down in front of another woman in a mall parking lot and was soon arrested. Given his criminal history and the fact that he is practically a killer of Nane, the court decided to sentence him to the maximum term. Gary received 15 years in prison for these 2 incidents, and he is serving his sentence to this day. Despite having the right to petition for early release, authorities are unlikely to grant Gary such an opportunity. Additionally, they have the right to accuse him of Nane's murder for the 3rd time, but they're not rushing to do so. The likelihood of the new trial ending in the same way as the previous 2 is very high, so investigators are trying to gather more evidence and prepare a stronger case against Gary. As for Kevin, after everything that happened, he pursued the study of law and, in 2011, he sued 2 police officers from the authorities of Russellville and Gary Dunn. He claimed that they were trying to pin someone else's crime on him, ignoring many clues and refusing to do their job properly. During the preparation for the trial, Kevin found out that, in fact, Gary's polygraph test results also showed lies, but investigators still did not consider him a suspect. Unfortunately, his lawsuit was dismissed due to the statute of limitations. As a result, negligent police officers did not face any consequences for letting the real killer roam free for years. And maybe, there again, in a few years, they will also not be punished for the fact that all acquaintances and relatives of Nana believed for years that Kevin was the murderer. Only a few years ago, Her parents stopped believing this and restored their relationship with him. Now, Kevin works as a lawyer and strives to help those who suffer from police negligence or unprofessionalism. Share your opinion about this story in the comments and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. A young woman was found dead at her workplace. Detectives found several unusual clues, but they were unable to catch the culprit. Several years later, when the police re-examined all the clues, they made a very unexpected breakthrough. Carrie Nelson was born on December 13, 1980 in the small American town of Laverne, Minnesota. She had loving parents, a younger sister, and many friends. Carrie was kind, empathetic, and always tried to help her loved ones. After graduating from the local high school, she enrolled in college in the neighboring state of North Dakota. She wanted to become a doctor so that she could help others. While in college, she met a young man named Mike Callan, and they became engaged. After a while, Carrie tried to balance her college studies with part-time work at the National Blue Mound State Park located near her hometown. Her duties included selling park tickets and escorting guests who came to relax at the camping site, go hiking, or see the bison. Carrie worked there for the second season in a row, and she loved the place. In addition to being a relatively easy job, she could also spend a lot of time in nature, enjoying the picturesque landscapes. On May 20, 2001, she went to work as usual that day. Besides her, only one young woman named Rebecca, who was doing an internship at the park, was working there. In addition to her main duties, Carrie had to train and introduce Rebecca to the work process. Carrie's shift started at 8 a.m. and was supposed to end at 3:30 p.m. For most of the day, she was with Rebecca explaining the work nuances. Around 12:45, Rebecca went to the office building located at the other end of the park, and Carrie stayed in a small room at the entrance. Rebecca returned around 2:30 p.m. She entered the building through the back door and immediately saw a horrific scene. Carrie lay motionless on the floor with a pool of blood near her head. At around the same time, a shocked Rebecca heard the front door. Thinking it might be the same person who attacked her colleague, she immediately ran out through the back door and rushed home. The young woman lived in a house located within the park grounds because her father was a manager, so she quickly ran there. Rebecca told her parents what had happened, and her father immediately ran there, while the young woman's mother called the police. The man arrived at the building and found no one there except Carrie. He tried to feel her pulse and realized that she was dead. After that, he closed the curtains, locked the front door, and called 911. At around the same time, another call came into the police. It turned out that the room Rebecca discovered her colleague's body inside, a park visitor walked in, not the attacker. The woman went to the registration desk and saw Carrie's body next to a puddle of blood, then returned to her car and also called 911. Police arrived on the scene and began their investigation. The young woman's body was lying behind the registration desk, where phones and cash registers were located, and things and papers were scattered around. One of the phone receivers was off the hook, the plastic pen of Carrie's chair was broken, and its pieces were on the floor. Based on this, the police assumed that a struggle had taken place between the victim and the attacker. After talking to the managers, the investigators found out that 2 bank bags intended for money storage had disappeared from the building. In addition, cash was taken from the cash register, with the total amount stolen being approximately $2,000. On the floor, detectives found several clues: men's wristwatches with a torn strap and a pack of cigarettes. Considering that Carrie did not smoke, the police assumed that the cigarettes were left by her killer. As for the watches, they assumed that the young woman tore them off the perpetrator's wrist during the struggle. Large particles of orange-colored stone were also found on the floor. The manager told investigators that these particles likely came from the decorative stone with the park's name, which was located on the registration desk. The police searched all the rooms and could not find the perpetrator. Considering that blood spatters were visible on the walls and ceiling of the room, they immediately assumed that this stone was the murder weapon. At the same time, their colleagues blocked the road leading to the park entrance and began questioning all visitors. The couple who stopped at the campground reported that around 2:30 p.m., a white car with a brown vinyl top drove past them at high speed. Unfortunately, they did not remember the model or license plate number of the vehicle. The investigation was complicated by the fact that there were no surveillance cameras in the park since crimes were very rare. The available evidence included a wristwatch, a pack of cigarettes, and the vague testimony of witnesses. Medical experts examined the victim's body and concluded that the cause of death was blows to the head with a heavy object. They suggested that the perpetrator may have used a large decorative stone, but this version could only be confirmed after its discovery. According to the investigators, the attack on Carrie occurred between 2 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. They found a love letter that she had written to her fiancé at her workplace. In the letter, Carrie expressed her eagerness for their wedding and described her desire to have 2 children. She put the date and time of 2 p.m. that day on the letter. Another interesting fact was that the men's watch found next to the victim's body stopped at 2:16 p.m. Perhaps they stopped working just after Carrie had taken them off her attacker's wrist. Police cordoned off the park and began searching for additional clues. 5 days later, they found the decorative stone in a nearby stream. Apparently, the killer took it with him and threw it into the stream from a bridge while driving over it. Medical experts compared the relief of the stone with Carey's head injuries and confirmed that it was the murder weapon. However, the water had washed away all fingerprints and DNA traces that the perpetrator may have left. No other clues were found, and the case remained unsolved for months. A year after the murder, a prisoner serving time in the local jail came forward to the police. He told them that his cellmate, Anthony Powers, had boasted to him about being responsible for Carey's murder. Detectives investigated and found that Powers had an extensive criminal history, mostly for bank robberies, which had landed him in jail multiple times. Interestingly, Powers had escaped from prison shortly before Carey's murder and was caught after the fact. However, his fingerprints and DNA did not match those found at the crime scene. Moreover, the witness's description of the murder did not match reality. The detectives concluded that both prisoners were attempting to deceive them for a reward of $50,000 for information leading to the solving of the case. Since Powers was already serving a life sentence, additional charges did not scare him. Additionally, in the event of a guilty verdict, he could have avoided being transferred to a federal prison and remained in the state correctional facility, which he preferred. The case remained unsolved for several years. Detectives regularly reviewed the case, hoping to find new evidence, but their efforts were fruitless. They even put up a photo of Carey in their office to remind themselves of the case. Every day. In 2007, the case was reopened. By that time, DNA analysis technology had significantly advanced, and experts re-examined the wristwatch. This time, they were able to identify 3 precise DNA profiles, one belonging to Carey, the second to an unknown man, and the third to an unknown woman. Both of these samples were run through the state database, but no matches were found. Then the detectives remembered an interesting detail. A special sticker was found on the pack of cigarettes discovered next to the victim's body. In those days, each state had a labeled tobacco products, so the police knew for sure that the pack was purchased in South Dakota. The detectives sent the DNA samples to their colleagues in that state, and here they had a long-awaited breakthrough. When they ran these profiles with the South Dakota database, one of them showed a complete match. The man turned out to be 35-year-old Randy Laroyal Swanee. This name had never appeared in police reports in Carey's case, so it was a surprise for the investigators. Randy turned out to be a serial robber, and at that time, he was serving a 30-month sentence in a South Dakota prison. At the time of the murder, he was out on parole. The police also discovered that he had a light-colored Oldsmobile Delta at that time, which matched the witness's description. The investigators checked his fingerprints, and they matched several prints found at the murder scene. Despite all this, the detectives wanted to gather as much evidence as possible before charging him. Randy had only 1 month left to serve in prison, so the police decided to act as quickly as possible. They spoke to his wife, not mentioning what her husband was suspected of. The woman was already used to Randy regularly coming to the attention of the police for robberies and thefts, so she was not surprised by their visit. The detective showed her photos of a watch, and the woman immediately confirmed that they belonged to her husband. She also said that she sometimes wore them, and the investigators immediately realized that the last DNA sample from the watch belonged to her. Then they decided to reveal everything and told her that they suspected her husband of killing a young woman. The woman burst into tears, but the police quickly realized that she was primarily scared for herself. Learning that her DNA might be on the watch, she thought that she too would be accused of the murder. On April 19th, detectives came to visit Randy in prison and attempted to speak with him without specifying what he was being suspected of. However, Randy refused to talk without a lawyer present. After the unsuccessful interrogation, Randy called his wife. As all prison calls are recorded, the police were able to listen in. The woman was angry and asked what he did. She revealed that the detectives were investigating him for a murder that occurred in Blue Mound State Park and was more worried about her DNA being found on a watch. At times, she began to cry and scream that she didn't want to go to jail for a crime she had nothing to do with. Randy, on the other hand, repeated that he knew nothing about it. The woman actively cooperated with the police, providing her DNA samples and allowing them to search their home. She also gave them several photos of Randy, one of which showed him sitting behind the wheel of a white car similar to the one witnesses saw. In another photo, the man's watch was visible and was fastened to the fourth clasp, just like the watch found at the crime scene. Additionally, his wife confirmed that Randy smoked the same brand of cigarettes that were found near the body. All of this was enough to take the case to trial. Randy was charged on May 8, 2007, one day before his release. He was immediately transferred to a prison in Minnesota, and the prosecution began preparing for the trial. According to their version of events, Randy initially chose the Park building as an easy target for robbery. There were no cameras or guards, but there was cash. When he entered, Carrie may have been in another room. Seeing that nobody was there, Randy began stealing money from the cash register. But the young woman returned and caught him in the act. A struggle ensued, and the man may have used threats to make her open the safe. Afterward, he took a decorative stone and struck her more than 5 times because he feared leaving a witness alive. Even his relatives, including his wife, testified against him in court. They all said that Randy regularly committed thefts, used banned substances, and had serious gambling problems, which constantly put him in debt. His former cellmate told how Randy mentioned leaving his watch at the crime scene. Another cellmate claimed that after the police came to interrogate Randy in jail, he said, "This time they got me. I'm looking at life." Randy's lawyers insisted that he had nothing to do with the murder. According to their version, Randy lost his watch sometime before the incident, and the real killer found it. However, this version conflicted with the results of DNA analysis. There were 3 samples of genetic material on the watch: Randy's, his wife's, and Carrie's. Randy claimed that on that day, he went fishing near a town about 150 kilometers away from the park. However, since he supposedly was there alone, no one could confirm his alibi. He also said that he had been in the park only once long before the murder. He admitted that he left his fingerprints there at that time, but there was another discrepancy. One of Randy's fingerprints was found on a leaflet that was made only 4 days before the murder. All defense arguments had no weight and contradicted real evidence, and Randy's lawyers tried to blame someone else. First, he called Powers and another inmate to testify, but their story still did not match reality. Then he began to harass the victim's fiancée, constantly hinting that he could be the real killer. The trial lasted until August 15, 2008. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Randy guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After that, he continued to insist on his innocence and filed multiple appeals, but they were all rejected. From the beginning, all his defense was built on absurd versions that contradicted DNA analysis and other evidence. So, there are no chances for his case to ever be reconsidered. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this clip if you liked it. Thanks for watching. In 2021, a young woman named Riley Goodrich went on a first date with a guy to the movies. However, the evening took a tragic turn. Although the case was quickly resolved, there are still many strange and shocking aspects to it. In this video, we will recount the events unfolding for Riley Goodrich and Anthony Baraja. On July 26, 2021, a tragic shooting occurred in California, resulting in the loss of 2 teenage lives. Some of my regular TikTok viewers may be familiar with Anthony Baraja, a 19-year-old famous TikToker with almost 1 million on the app, and posted videos of himself singing, doing pranks on his family, and sharing moments from his life. On the 4th of July that year, he attended a party where he met an 18-year-old named Riley Goodrich. Although Riley wasn't as popular on the app, she had a decent following of over 20,000. She was studying marketing on a full scholarship at Grand Canyon University and was home for the summer visiting her parents. Described as a nice and easygoing young woman, Riley got along well with Anthony. They spent time together whenever their mutual friends would meet up, and eventually decided to go on a proper date, just the 2 of them. Riley informed her father about meeting someone, but he was skeptical when she mentioned that Anthony was a famous TikToker. However, on the 26th of July, 2021, Riley excitedly prepared for her first date. Anthony had recently returned from a holiday in Hawaii and wanted to impress the Goodrich family. He brought souvenirs for the entire family when he came to pick up Riley. Her father was touched by this gesture, seeing it as a sweet act, and he finally started accepting Anthony. The couple then set off for their date. Anthony planned to take Riley to her favorite restaurant called Wood Ranch. After enjoying some food, they headed to the cinema. Anthony had acquired tickets for a late-night showing of the new Purge movie at the Regal Edward Theater, scheduled for around 9:35 p.m. During the date, Riley sent a few text messages to her mother to keep her updated on how things were going. At some point during the movie, she messaged her mother, mentioning that she found the storyline a bit dull and silly. Little did they know that this would be the last message Riley would ever send. After the movie ended, the theater employees began cleaning the theater, only to discover a horrifying scene. Riley had been shot in the head, and Anthony had been shot in the eye. Tragically, Riley was pronounced dead at the scene, while Anthony was rushed to Riverside Community Hospital and placed on life support. The doctors found several projectiles in his brain, and the police recovered 3 bullet casings and 1 projectile in the theater. An investigation quickly commenced, aiming to uncover what exactly happened that night. It didn't take long for the police to find the person they were looking for. Only 6 tickets were purchased for the 9:35 p.m. showing of the Purge movie, including the ones bought by Anthony and Riley. Through ticket records, the police identified a 20-year-old man named Joseph Jimenez as another ticket purchaser. An anonymous tip led the police to Joseph, who had gone to watch the movie with 3 friends that night. According to the 3 friends' accounts, Joseph left during the middle of the movie and returned with a bag, claiming to have a strap. His behavior, including mumbling and talking to himself, made them extremely uncomfortable. They devised a plan to leave, without raising his suspicion. They excused themselves, telling Joseph they needed to use the restroom, and left the theater without alerting the staff or contacting the police. With Joseph now alone in the theater, he committed a despicable and cowardly act. He approached the unsuspecting teens from behind and shot them. Riley was shot in the back of the head, resulting in her immediate death. Anthony, upon hearing the gunshots, turned around, and Joseph shot him in the eye. The sound of the movie masked the sound of the gunshots, so none of the staff heard anything unusual. At around 11:28 p.m., 2 witnesses saw Joseph running out of the theater and escaping into his vehicle. The following day, the police went to Joseph's house. He had called the Riverside Sheriff's Department, claiming that someone was following him, but it was the law enforcement officials who were there to search his home. Joseph was seen yelling and brandishing a handgun, but thankfully, no one else was injured. He surrendered to the police without much resistance. The caliber of the handgun he waved at the police matched the one used in the shooting. Furthermore, a movie ticket for the Forever Purge was found in his wallet, placing him at the crime scene. Initially, Joseph was arrested for the murder of Riley and the attempted murder of Anthony. However, the charges were soon changed to 2 counts of murder as Anthony succumbed to his injuries a few days later. Despite Joseph blaming the voices in his head for what happened, stating that they tormented him for over 8 months, no motive has been established. He claimed that the voices threatened harm to his friends and family if he didn't shoot the young couple in the theater. Nevertheless, he didn't explain how killing the couple would save his loved ones. Joseph had been diagnosed with schizophrenia 8 months prior to the shooting but had recently stopped taking his prescribed medication, citing running out and neglecting to refill it. He told investigators that the voices were overwhelming that night, making it impossible to concentrate on the movie. Thus, he went to his car, retrieved a gun, shot the teenagers, and swiftly fled. He was arrested the following day. Joseph faced a special circumstances allegation of lying in wait, which refers to hiding and waiting for the right moment to launch an attack. This charge carries the death penalty. Currently, he is being held on a $2 million bail. There is no indication that he knew the victims before the attack, and their status as TikTok influencers doesn't appear to have played a role in the crime. Joseph offered his condolences to the victims' families in a statement, expressing regret for his actions, stating, "I wish I didn't do it." One unsettling aspect of this case is that Joseph's friends who were with him that night faced no repercussions. They weren't charged, even though they failed to notify the authorities despite their fears about Joseph's potential danger. Their decision to leave him behind indicates that they knew he was acting strangely and might have possessed a firearm. While they might not have known the extent of his capabilities, they had enough concerns to exit the theater. The theater has since implemented purse checks before allowing entry. Riley's father advocates for the introduction of metal detectors in movie theaters, similar to those used at sports events. However, the cost and practicality of such measures make them nearly impossible to implement. This case is a heartbreaking reminder of the senselessness and innocence lost, as 2 teenagers were simply enjoying their first date together. It serves as a poignant reminder that life can be unpredictable and fleeting. I will strive to provide updates on the case in the future, and I will leave them pinned in the comments. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this clip if you liked it. Thanks for